right? So how many of you love a church potluck? I do have to say, I've been serving here for 10 years, and I've been surprised by the lacking of church potlucks that we have. And I'm not complaining about that either, because I'm weird about food. I'm not gonna lie. You know, the weird congealed thing that someone brings, they're like, oh, I have to eat this. I have to put this on my plate because Susie brought it, but I don't really want to eat it. Or the Jell-O salad, which fruit and Jell-O makes sense. Like, I've seen meat in Jell-O salad before. Not here, thank God. But potlucks are really different depending on where you live. And I lived in Pennsylvania for 4 years, as you know. Before I came here, I lived in Pennsylvania for 4 years, and every Thursday night for like a major portion of the year, like 9 months out of the year, we'd have confirmation every Thursday night. And the families would bring food. And sometimes it was like, oh my gosh, like people in Pennsylvania know how to make hoagies. Hoagies are a Subway sandwich. They just call it a hoagie in Eastern Pennsylvania. They know how to make like meatball subs and really good stuff like that. But then they also make some stuff that I just think is weird. In Eastern Pennsylvania, they have this thing. Every food has a different region. They have this stuff. It's called scrapple. We're going to put it up here. Yeah. People are applauding for Scrapple. Do you know what Scrapple is? Scrapple is like worse than the, okay, again, these are my weird food sensibilities. Hot dogs are like the weird parts that they don't use. Scrapple is like the lower than the low parts that they don't use for hot dogs. That is what Scrapple is. But Pennsylvania also brings with it this beautiful thing, the Philly cheesesteak. And if you notice, I picked a picture out that has Cheese Whiz on it because you don't put regular cheese on there. You put cheese product on a Philly cheesesteak. And my husband, I wish he was in here because I have a picture of, this is from Joe and Pat's. This is from our favorite place in Staten Island. Well, his favorite place too. Growing up, he introduced it to me, the best pizza in America, right there, Joe and Pat's, Staten Island. You have to go to Staten Island to get the best pizza in the world. The South has some super cool things like boiled peanuts. Have you ever had these things? Oh my gosh, fantastic. And grits. I interviewed for a job in South Carolina, and they took me out to breakfast. I'd never had grits before. I was like, these are the best things in the world. Like, I think they're better than hash browns, and hash browns are really good. In Iowa, they have pickled herring. These are all things that I like. These are like regional sensibility. Like, it is so good. I like things that are pickled. And Florida, the best. The key lime pie. Everyone knew what I was going to say. The key lime pie. Because food is incredibly important. We'll just go to the next slide. Food is otherwise I'm going to just want to eat key lime pie. Food is incredibly important to who we are. Food is incredibly important to our existence. It shapes our mood. It shapes our conversation. If you're eating a good meal, even if you love the people that you're with, what are you talking about? The food that you're eating because it tastes good. Food is the center of our lives. When we have it, we're like, oh, that was such a good meal. Have you ever had such a good meal that you're just like, oh my gosh, that was the best meal I've ever eaten in my life? Or when you have eaten too much food, you feel like that kind of gross thing. Or when you are hungry, you are one of two things. There are two things we identify in our house when you're hungry. You're either hangry, which is hungry and angry. That's what I get hangry. Or you get, this is a term George made up, you get tungry, which is tired and hungry. George is like, I'm so hungry. And he's like, and I'm so tired. Yeah, tungry. Will gets both. Tired, hungry, and tungry. It's not pretty. Feed that kid. But food reminds us of our basic needs. It reminds us of those things that we need in our life. We need food, we need sleep, and we need a relationship with God. And Jesus thought that those things were important too. How many times did Jesus get in trouble for eating with sinners? Like, he didn't just get in trouble for being with sinners, he got in trouble for eating with them as well. He knew that feeding the body and the soul were intertwined in the roots of our faith. He knew that, communion is the ultimate family meal that we share together as a family of faith. And he knew how important that was to our lives. And so this morning, we're going to be looking at a story that is rare. It's not rare because It's in the gospel 4 times. But there are only 11 stories in the 4 gospels that are the same. Like the gospel writers, they all thought certain stories were very important. But this story, the gospel writers thought was super important because it's in all 4 of the gospels. They thought it was super important to the life and the ministry of Jesus, and it's surrounded around food. So let's read that scripture today. This comes from Matthew's gospel, the 14th chapter, beginning at the 13th verse. Okay, so it says, "Now when Jesus heard this," I love the beginning of stories when you're like, wait, what did Jesus hear? I don't know. So what had happened right before this is Jesus had heard that his cousin, John the Baptist, had been beheaded. And so what Jesus had heard was that his cousin had died. And so because of that, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. And when the crowds heard it, they got excited. They followed him on foot from the towns. And when he went ashore, he saw the crowd, and he had compassion on them, and he cured their sick. So Jesus definitely had this desire that if something was going on, he was going to step away for a while. But then he saw all these people coming to him, and he's like, wait, I need to help them. I need to heal the sick. I need to be there. So when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place. The hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they can go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, they need not go away. You give them something to eat. And they replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves, and he gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the crowds, and all ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. I just want to comment about the size of the baskets. I always imagine in my mind that they're small, but they were actually kind of like rather large baskets that were full left with food. And those that ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. I do want to point out, too, that 5,000 men, so that's what they counted. They counted the men that were there. So if you imagine how many people were there were probably 15 to 20,000 people there. Because if you start to do the multiplication of the number that were there, if there were 5,000 men there, then the men had brought their wives, so there's 5,000 women there, another 5,000 women there. Then if each family had 2.5 children, there's about 15 to 20,000 people there. There's a lot of people that Jesus fed, 5 loaves, 2 fishes. It's a pretty big deal. Such a big deal that they included it in all 4 Gospels. Such a big deal this one meal of feeding these people was. So imagine, if you will, we can just go to the next slide. Imagine, if you will, you've gone out to some deserted place. You have followed this man, this Jesus, that has gone out to go pray and be quiet and be by himself, because you've heard him speak. You want more. You want more of his healing, wholeness, more. You've heard of these great things that he's done. And while you're there, you realize that you really haven't thought about your day. When the disciples say that when the evening has come, that's when the disciples started to get panicky. So they'd been out there for a while. And you haven't really thought about what you're going to eat, how you're going to eat. You know, in those days, you couldn't just run to the 7-Eleven and grab food. You had to prepare a meal. You had to make bread. You had to ground the grain, and then make the bread. But you were swept up by the majesty of being in relationship, by hearing the words of this man who was teaching you something, this guy who was healing people and making them whole. And then you realize, or maybe Jesus' friends realized, or maybe there was rumbling in the crowd that people were getting hungry, but Jesus' friends, his disciples, they started to get panicky. They realized that there's no way that they're going to be able to feed 20,000 people, 20,000 men, women, and children who are gathered, because they've forgotten who they're with. They've forgotten, just for a second, who they've been serving. They've forgotten that Jesus was doing miracles 30 seconds ago, and oh wait, he might be able to do a miracle in this as well. But Jesus provides. Jesus gives them exactly what they need, and he says, guess what? Come alongside me. Let's do this miracle together. Let's provide for these people together. They say yes to the abundance that God gives them. They say yes to the abundance that God provides in our lives. See, the story of the feeding of the 5,000 is really about saying yes to the gifts that we've been given by God. It's saying yes to relationship with God. It's saying yes to that unconditional love and forgiveness. It's saying yes to being a part of that miracle. And I think that our passage teaches us three things really important. First of all, that God gives us the things that we need. Secondly, that Jesus uses what we bring. And thirdly, that Jesus then involves us in the miracle. So the other day, Will, my 5-year-old son, had not seen his grandfather in a while. My father-in-law lives just down the road from us. But when my mother-in-law's in town, they don't get to see each other. And then my parents had Will for a while, and so it had been a while since they'd had some good Poppy Will time together. And Will is sitting in the back seat of the car. I think we were coming back from the gym. And he's sitting in the back seat in the car plotting. I was like, you're going to hang out with Poppy today? I said, what are you going to do with Poppy today? You're probably going to eat ice cream and watch too much TV. He's like, yes. And Poppy's going to take me to the store. I said, and why is Poppy going to take you to the store? Poppy doesn't need to buy you things when he sees them. He's like, yes. I need another stink book because I need more stink books. These are the books he's reading right now. They're Judy Moody books. They're really good books. And I would like another Lego set. And he actually said, I need another Lego set. I need another Lego set for Poppy's house. And and the list continued on, and I was like, whoa. Hold on. You need none of these things. You want these things. It's like, listen, you've got lots of books, kiddo. You've got lots of books, and oh, by the way, we live down the street from the Dove Library, where we can check out those stink books that you can read, that you'll read once, and you'll just put back on your shelf, and you'll get, a month ago he was reading Captain Underpants books, now he's on to stink books. So, we have the library, which we can use. And oh, by the way, you have thousands of Legos. You don't need any more Legos. You want Legos. I told Will that there are things that we need. We need food. We need shelter. We need clothes. We need to brush our teeth and to shower and to a place to sleep. These are necessities. Wants are books and Legos and whatever the latest throwaway spinner gadget is that you want, or orange chicken every night, which he would also want. But these are not things that he needs. These are things that I think are going to take the rest of his life, because I know for all the rest of us, it takes the rest of our life to realize the difference between need and want. But we talked about the fact that we only need to sleep and a place to sleep and food and shelter and those things because those are our basic needs. Those are basic needs that everybody has. Those are needs that God provides for us, and that God provides for us abundantly. Not what we want always, but what we need. God doesn't provide for us. God doesn't promise us that if we're faithful that we're going to get a big house and a fancy car and a trophy wife and 2.5 children. God promises us that he's going to love us. God promises us that he's going to forgive us. God promises that he is going to provide miracles in our life. The miracles like the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, that we are going to be loved unconditionally, forgiven without much in return. When Jesus did that miracle, the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, what was left? Not very much. He provided until they were full. He didn't just give them like a couple of pieces. He provided until they were full, enough to prove that the miracle had happened, that the miracle had taken place in their life. He provided what they needed. What they got was Jesus' love, where they were getting it from nowhere else. What they got was his compassion. He felt compelled to leave what he was doing. He felt compelled to leave his grief to help other people. He saw that there was a need, and his heart was filled with love and compassion for them, and he gave to them abundance so that each person had their fill. Enough so that no person was greedy, no person was like hoarding food over on the side. They were getting exactly what they needed, and they were satiated by it. Because living abundantly in Jesus Christ is being a good steward of God's blessing. It's saying, I am going to live every day in the abundance of God, the abundance of God's love, the abundance of God's forgiveness, the abundance of relationship with Jesus Christ, knowing that I have been given gifts and skills to do Christ's work each and every day, and I get to be a part of who Jesus is, his life and his ministry. That's exactly what happened that day. They got what they needed from Jesus. They were given abundantly. They were given exactly what was needed. And Jesus did that with what was brought to him. What was brought to him was this small, meager thing. The disciples were starting to panic. How do we feed all of these people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes? Have you ever been to a potluck where there was never not enough food? Oh, you have. Sue Moore is shaking her head. I always get a little panicky whenever I cook dinner for people that there is never going to be enough food, which is why I cook for an army when people come over and I have 1,000 pounds of leftovers because I'm worried that there just might not be enough. And I get the disciples' panic and worry that there wasn't going to be enough. I get the panic and worry that maybe we just need to, send them away because 5 loaves and 2 fishes is not enough. What would happen if this crowd that has been here all day, that everybody starts to get hangry? What would happen if that happened? And what does Jesus say to the disciples? He says, you give them something to eat. Don't worry about it. Give them something to eat. He says to the disciples, you start the process. You've come to me, you've asked, and I am here to fill that need. I will use what you bring. See, God has a history of using what we bring, the good and the bad, and making something good out of it. If you look throughout the Bible, there are people that God used that you're like, why did God use that person? Moses was a stutterer. He was a murderer. And he helped rescue his people because he said yes to the miracle that God was doing in his life. Jeremiah, he says, God, you can't use me, I'm too young. And yet, he said yes to the miracle that God was doing in his life. Paul was a persecutor of Christians, and God used that. Lydia, one of my favorite stories in Acts, you read about this woman named Lydia. She was a dealer in purple. She was a very rich businesswoman in the early church, and God used that businesswoman prowess that she had for the kingdom. Ruth and Naomi, women who their family died, who they had no source of hope, God used them. Ruth became the mother and a direct descendant of David, and then eventually Jesus. God uses what we have and what we are, and God uses it for the glory of the kingdom. God uses gifts that we might think are super small, like 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and he uses them in abundance for the kingdom. God takes the good and bad places in our lives and uses them for the glory of God. What happened to the disciples that day? He used what they were able to bring, and he multiplied it. Jesus involves the disciples in the multiplication. It's Jesus that does the miracle, but we are the hands and feet that make that miracle happen. We are the hands and feet that bring the message of Jesus Christ. We are the hands and feet that illuminate the message. The disciples brought the food to Jesus, but they distributed the food. And they brought it back, and they showed that the miracle had taken place. The miracle that Jesus multiplies in our lives. Because Jesus involves us in the miracle. Now, if you read in the beginning of the passage, there were two things that had happened. Jesus was coming back from being in mourning for his cousin, but the disciples were also coming back from being sent out to do the work of Jesus, the work that had been placed before them. They were coming back from preaching and teaching and doing miracles in the name of Jesus. They had been doing the work. They had been participating in the miracle and the work that happens in Jesus Christ. And Jesus is asking us to do the same, to take part in the miracle, to take part in the work of Jesus Christ, the abundance of work in Jesus Christ, to use our gifts and skills which we've been given by God to do the work of Jesus. In our homes and in our work and in our daily lives, we are called each day to participate in the miracle, to participate in the miracle that God has for us each day. Because every day we get to love and serve Jesus Christ. Every day we get to be in relationship with other people, to tell others, to live into relationship with Jesus Christ is a miracle. Wendell Berry says this, he says, to treat life is less than a miracle is to give up on it. I love that. To treat life as less than a miracle every day is to say, whatever, it's not that important. But Jesus gives us every day that we can live and live abundantly. And we get to choose every day how we will live into the abundance we've been given by Jesus Christ, who loves us, who wants to be in relationship with us, and who wants us to come alongside the miracle that he is already doing in each of our lives. Let us pray. God, there are times when we get panicky, when we get worried that there's not enough,